The wind howled through the pines as the last streaks of sunlight bled across the Montana wilderness. Snow clung to the trees like ash on bone, and the cold was the kind that bit deep, merciless and unforgiving. It was the kind of winter where most creatures burrowed in or vanished altogether. But not tonight. In a secluded cabin tucked at the edge of the Bitterroot Range, Thomas Reed was stacking logs by the fireplace. A former wildlife biologist turned recluse, he had come to this place 3 years ago, seeking silence after a tragedy that had cracked his life in two. His days were now filled with solitude, the occasional howl of a distant wolf pack his only company, until tonight. Outside, under the silver cast of a full moon, something stirred beyond the tree line. Thomas paused, hearing a sound that didn't belong to the forest's usual rhythm, a low, anguished whimper that clawed at his heart like something ancient and grieving. He stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand, unsure whether it was instinct or empathy guiding him. Then he saw her, a massive gray wolf, eyes glistening with unmistakable pain, emerge from the shadows. Her fur was matted with snow and streaked with blood. In her jaws, she carried a tiny, unmoving bundle, a cub, limp and dying. She didn't growl. She didn't flee. She just looked at Thomas and laid the cub at his feet. And in that moment, the wild and the human world collided, and everything changed. Thomas knelt slowly, breath clouding in the frigid air. The mother wolf stood still, eyes locked with his, eyes that spoke of desperation, trust, and something more haunting, resignation. He had spent years studying creatures like her, tracking their movements, interpreting their behavior. But nothing in any textbook had prepared him for this. The cub lay motionless in the snow, barely breathing. Blood soaked its tiny fur, seeping from a deep gash along its ribs. Thomas reached out with trembling hands, more afraid of the mother than he let show. Yet she didn't flinch. She simply whimpered once and lowered her head. This wasn't normal. Wolves feared humans, avoided them at all costs. They didn't seek them out, especially not for help. And yet here she was, entrusting her most fragile gift to a man whose kind had long been their greatest threat. Thomas cradled the pup gently, wrapping it in his flannel and backing toward the cabin. The mother followed, keeping a cautious but deliberate distance. Inside, he laid the cub near the fire and rummaged for his old field med kit, unused for years but still intact. As he worked with swift, practiced hands, flashes of memory broke through. His daughter's face, pale and still beneath hospital lights, the helplessness, the failure. He shook it off. He wasn't going to lose another innocent life. Not tonight. And as the mother wolf lay outside his door, howling low and mournful into the night, something ancient and sacred stirred, something that neither man nor beast fully understood. The cabin was quiet save for the crackle of firewood and the shallow, raspy breaths of the injured cub. Thomas worked quickly, flushing the wound with iodine and stitching the torn flesh with steady, if reluctant, hands. The cub whimpered weakly, its tiny body flinching with each tug of thread. Outside the frosted window, the mother wolf paced, her eyes never leaving the door. Thomas hadn't treated a living thing in years. Not since he lost Ellie. Just as he tied off the final stitch, a sharp noise split the silence, the unmistakable rumble of an engine echoing through the valley. Thomas stiffened, peering through the window toward the tree line. Headlights flickered in the distance, bouncing along the ridge road. Someone was coming. He moved to the door, heart pounding, and saw what he feared most, an ATV, marked with the bright orange vest of a local trapper, weaving through the snow toward the forest edge. Probably Wilson, the man who'd spent the past 2 winters setting illegal snares just beyond the boundary of protected land. The wolf outside froze, ears perked and body low. She sensed it too. Thomas cursed under his breath. If Wilson saw her, or the cub, he'd do more than report it. He'd kill without hesitation, claim it was a threat. And if he found out Thomas had taken in a wounded predator, the consequences could go far beyond this isolated cabin. Thomas faced a choice: stay hidden and safe, or protect something wild that had chosen to trust him. Thomas moved fast. He wrapped the cub tightly in a towel and tucked it into the crate he once used for field rescues. With a few whispered words, He slid it beneath the workbench near the fire, hidden, but warm. The mother wolf, now alert and growling low, backed into the tree line, disappearing into the shadows just as the ATV rumbled closer. Moments later, a heavy knock thundered at the door. "Reed, you in there?" came Wilson's voice, sharp, accusing. "You see anything strange around here tonight?" Thomas opened the door partway, keeping his body angled to block the view inside. "Nothing but cold and quiet." "Why?" Wilson stepped closer, boots crunching on the frozen steps. "Something's been bleeding. Found tracks, wolf prints, and blood. Big ones hurt or protecting something. I plan on following it. You'd do right to keep out of it." Thomas didn't answer. He watched Wilson's eyes scan the trees behind him, then flick toward the cabin. A long pause. A smirk. "You're still soft, aren't you? Even after all that happened," Wilson muttered. "Wouldn't be surprised if you're hiding something." Thomas stiffened. The words hit harder than he let show. After Wilson finally left, Thomas closed the door and leaned against it, pulse hammering. He knew the trapper wouldn't give up. And Weiss, if the wolf cub survived, what then? Keeping it hidden would be impossible. As the storm clouds gathered over the mountains and dusk began its descent, Thomas realized this wasn't just about one life anymore. It was about redemption and defiance. Now began to fall again, slow, heavy flakes that muffled the forest like a blanket of silence. Thomas paced inside the cabin, every sense on edge. The cub stared faintly under the bench, its breathing ragged but steady. He knelt beside it, brushing a hand gently over its fragile head. There was still hope, but time was slipping away. Outside, he spotted movement. The mother wolf had returned, eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. She didn't approach, only watched, waiting for something. Maybe a sign, maybe trust. Then came the distant pop of a rifle. Thomas's blood ran cold. He raced to the back window, heart pounding. A single echo, swallowed quickly by the mountains, but it was close. Too close. His mind spiraled. Had Wilson found her? Shot her? He grabbed his coat, stuffing the medical kit, protein bars, and a blanket into his pack. He couldn't stay inside. Not anymore. If Wilson was hunting her down, she'd never survive. Not wounded, not alone. And if the cub woke to no mother, all of this would be for nothing. Before he left, Thomas scribbled a note and pinned it to the kitchen table, just in case. The wind screamed as he stepped out into the darkness, cradling the cub close to his chest. Somewhere in these woods, a mother was bleeding. Somewhere nearby, a man with a rifle was looking to finish what he'd started. And for the first time in years, Thomas Reed had a reason to fight again. The forest was a different beast at night, alive with unseen eyes, ancient shadows, and the whisper of something feral just beyond reach. Thomas trudged through knee-deep snow, the wolf cub bundled against his chest, its shallow breaths barely warming the wool of his coat. Each step was heavier than the last, weighed down not just by cold but by urgency. A fresh trail of blood shimmered beneath the moonlight. He found it near the frozen creek, spattered against pine trunks and pressed into the snow. Paw prints staggering, erratic. The mother wolf was hurt worse than he thought. Thomas quickened his pace, heart hammering in his throat. A crack rang out. Another rifle shot, closer this time. Thomas dropped to a crouch, eyes scanning the ridge. A flicker of orange caught his eye through the trees. Wilson, crouched low, rifle raised, eyes locked on something in the distance. Thomas followed the line of his gaze. There she was. The mother wolf stood on a ridge, favoring one leg, blood trailing down her flank. She didn't run. She stood her ground, staring down the hunter with a fierce, primal calm. Thomas had seconds to decide. He burst from cover, yelling, "Wilson, stop!" The trapper spun, startled, the rifle jerking. "I said drop it." Thomas shouted again, stepping between the rifle and the wolf. Wilson's eyes narrowed. "You've lost it, Reed. That thing should be dead." Thomas didn't move. So should I. But here we are. And the forest held its breath, waiting. Wilson's finger hovered over the trigger, his breath steaming in the cold night air. "You've gone soft, Tom," he growled. You think saving that cub's gonna fix whatever broke you? This isn't a fairy tale. That wolf is dangerous. Thomas didn't flinch. She came to me, Wilson, carried her cub in her mouth and laid it at my feet. You think that's instinct? That's trust. And if you shoot her now, after what she did, after what I saw, you're not just killing an animal. You're killing something sacred. For a moment, only the wind answered. Then came a sound, small, but piercing. A whimper. The cub stared in Thomas's arms, giving a soft, high-pitched cry. The mother's ears perked, and her body shifted. No longer poised for a last stand, she was reaching toward her pup. Even Wilson hesitated. His jaw clenched. The rifle lowered slightly. She's bleeding out, Thomas said quietly. But she didn't run. She brought her baby to the one person she thought might help. I don't care what you think, Wilson. That matters. Wilson's gaze flicked between the man and the wolf. For the first time, his voice softened. That cub won't survive out here. Then I'll take them both, Thomas said. I'll do what no one did for me. I'll fight to keep them alive. A long silence passed before Wilson lowered the rifle completely. You're mad, he muttered, turning back toward his ATV. But I guess madness suits you. Thomas exhaled, knees nearly buckling. The mother wolf stepped forward. The wild had chosen him. The cabin glowed like a warm ember in the snow-covered woods, a fragile pocket of peace in a world that had nearly turned violent. Thomas moved carefully inside, placing the cub beside the fire once more, his hands still trembling from adrenaline and cold. The mother wolf limped through the open door behind him, blood dripping steadily from her side. She didn't snarl, didn't hesitate. She simply walked to her pup and lay down beside it with a heavy sigh, her body curling protectively around the tiny, breathing bundle. Thomas stood in stunned silence, overcome by the surreal tenderness of the moment. This wasn't just instinct, it was love. A mother's fierce, unwavering love. He reached for the med kit again, slower this time, making sure she saw his hands. Her golden eyes met his, and though her ears flicked with warning, she didn't move as he knelt beside her. Gently, Thomas cleaned her wound, whispering calm words as he wrapped her flank. She winced, but allowed it. For the first time in years, Thomas didn't feel empty. He wasn't just patching up bodies tonight. He was repairing something inside himself, too. He thought of Ellie, the helplessness he'd carried for so long. Maybe he couldn't save her, but he could save this family. And maybe that was enough. Outside, the forest remained still. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting golden light across man, wolf, and cub, 3 lives drawn together by loss, bound now by something deeper than fear or instinct. Trust. Days passed, and the snow deepened, sealing the cabin in quiet isolation. Thomas kept the fire burning and watched over his unexpected guests. The cub, though weak, grew stronger with each sunrise, its eyes opening to a world of warmth and safety it had nearly lost. The mother healed slowly, but her eyes remained alert, her gaze softer now, no longer clouded by fear. Thomas had changed, too. The stillness that once haunted him now comforted him. Where silence had once echoed with grief, it now rang with quiet purpose. Caring for the wolves reminded him what it meant to be alive, not just to survive, but to protect, to feel, to connect. One morning, just as the horizon blushed with the first signs of spring, the mother wolf stood at the door. The cub trotted at her heels, now playful and full of life. She turned to Thomas once, held his gaze, and with a silent nod, a farewell, or maybe a thank you, disappeared into the woods, her pup following closely behind. Thomas stood in the doorway for a long while, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. They were gone, but he wasn't alone. Not anymore. In saving them, he'd salvaged the best parts of himself. Grief had carved out space for something new, something wild, beautiful, and deeply human. And in that quiet moment beneath the vast Montana sky, Thomas understood. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from running away from pain. Sometimes, it walks right up to your door, on 4 legs.